Welcome to the programme. Myanmar's reeling after its bloodiest day yet in the wake of the latest military coup. But what will this mean going forward for the people who still take to the streets to call for the reinstatement of civilian rule? This is the France 24 debate. I'm Mark Owen. Our guests for this discussion are the Myanmar specialist David Cambrew from Sciences Po. David, thank you very much for being with us here in the studio. Kyo Win is founder and executive director of the Burma Human Rights Network. Michael Charney, Professor of Asian and Military History at the School of Asian Studies, and Matthew Smith, Co-founder and Chief Executive of Fortify Rights. Thank you all for being with us. Now, before our guests share their thoughts, let's watch this report by Marius Sophos here at France 24.
Not seen in public since being ousted and detained by Myanmar's military, Aung San Suu Kyi appeared in court via video conference on Monday on what critics of the coup say are trumped-up charges, more of which were added at the hearing.
She was charged together with President U Win Myint and Nibiro Chairman Dr. Miu Aung, the three accused, all combined. So the Brazilian side added two more cases for Aung San Suu Kyi in this hearing.
According to one of Suu Kyi's lawyers, she appeared to be in good health. The ousted leader's next hearing will be on March the 15th. Meanwhile, in Myanmar's largest city, Yangon, protests continued on Monday following the bloodiest day so far in the aftermath of the coup, with security forces firing on crowds on Sunday, killing more than a dozen people. Myanmar has been in chaos since the military seized power after alleging fraud in a November election won by Aung San Suu Kyi's party in a landslide. Daily protests are getting increasingly violent as police and the army try to stamp them out.
Marius Sophos with that report here at France 24, and I think the image is really telling the story about the defiance that's going on the streets of Myanmar right now. Let's bring in Kyo Win for a first comment on this one, founder and executive director of Burma Human Rights Network. Kyo Win, thanks for joining us. Tell us your reaction to what's been going on, sir. Give us your reaction to what's happening.
Yeah, this is utterly brutal and cruelty we are seeing on 21st century. The mentality of uncivilized people, the way the military is proving day by day, every day. And you see on the other hand, the vulnerable people, the peace-loving people, they're armed without any arms and they are peacefully protesting and they've been cracked down violently. And you see yesterday alone, we can verify that 17 people has been shot dead across Burma. So this is a people, without any arms. They are protesting for overthrowing democratically elected government. This is the situation right now in Burma.
And clearly, I can hear in your voice shock, disgust at what's happening.
Absolutely, and you see that the past few days, people has been, the authorities, the security forces, has been raiding people who showed that their disagreement with the coup, and they join a civil disobedience movement, which we, in short term we call a CDM movement, and this is getting momentum day by day. That is why the military has been threatened and they've been afraid. That's why they're using violence force. But the point here is, how far these people can survive on the street when they are taking their life at risk. This is the time that international community need to respond, and we didn't see any solid and any appropriate response from international community. Yes, there is a symbolic response, but this is not effective yet. And where is France and Germany and EU? We want to see their response.
Indeed, and that is something that we will be addressing in this debate. Kyo Win from the Burma Human Rights Network. Bear with us, sir. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's bring in for our next comment Matthew Smith, co-founder and chief executive of Fortify Rights. Matthew, thank you for being with us. Do you have any news from the situation on the streets of Burma's big cities where the protests are taking place?
Well, we share the worry and the shock and the concern of Kyo Win, our friend and colleague, and the people of Myanmar are exercising their right to peaceful assembly. And journalists around the country are trying to report on what's going on. The Myanmar military is actively opposing both of those. They're attempting to suppress the truth. They don't want the world to know what's happening in the country. And they don't want the people on the streets. And they're using excessive force. They're using lethal force. As Jawin mentioned, a number of people were killed over the last several days. And we do fear that the situation could get worse in terms of the loss of life. The people of Myanmar are resilient. They are determined. And I think the UN Special Rapporteur put it best when he said that a number of people, which we're also hearing, are fearful of the lethal force and excessive force, but they're more scared about having to live under direct military rule again. They've been down that road before, and they'll do anything to prevent it.
Including, and Jawin said 17 people killed. We're seeing reports of 18 killed at least, including, Matthew, put their lives on the line.
That's right. And I just want to mention too, it would be important to get the perspectives of the women of Myanmar. Women are risking their lives protesting in the streets. There are amazing women human rights defenders throughout Myanmar that have for many years been the backbone of the human rights movement. But you're absolutely right. People are risking their lives and they are seeking support from the international community. And we also share Jawin's concern there that there needs to be more action faster.
Matthew Smith of 45 Rights. Bear with us, sir. Thank you for that initial response. Coming to David Cameron here in the studio. David, you often come in and explain the situation in Myanmar, previously Burma, to us. And we always appreciate your knowledge of the context. What we're seeing here, I suspect, is something that we could say we've seen before on different occasions.
Yes and no. As a Southeast Asia generalist more than a Burma specialist, the military are playing, the Tatmadaw are playing two games. They're playing their traditional repressive game. Remember, these are not politicians dressed as generals. These are combat officers, okay? The only thing they know is to repress. They've been fighting a civil war for 70 years. So they're playing that game of repression, but they're also trying to play the Thai game, using the Thai model. You have a coup, and you have a coup to defend democracy, in this case, supposedly because of electoral fraud, which is what has happened in Thailand, at least on 12 occasions. But also in Thailand, that's the problem. In Thailand, you have a coup also to defend the monarchy. And Burma doesn't have a monarchy, except for since the tragic decision by the British in 1885 to expel the last king and put him into exile. But they do have the equivalent of a queen, which is Aung San Suu Kyu, and she happens to be the leader of the opposition. So the military is sort of in a double bind. The military seem to believe their own propaganda. That is, that they are the only guardians of national unity. This is the kind of the way they justify their existence. The military gets about 14% of the budget, 13-14% of GDP. Of GDP is spent on the military. And it's in their interest that there is political instability that allows them to exploit the situation in the frontier areas to control a certain number of trades, including in jade. So they're trying to play the Thai game, but they're ill-equipped to do so, and they have really no political sense that there is this incredible opposition to them. They have managed to do something which Aung San Suu Kyi hasn't been able to achieve. That after initial hesitation, the ethnic groups seem to have come on side in opposition to the military, which is fair enough, given that the military is constantly repressing them. So they've achieved this unity in Burma, in Myanmar, that has been elusive for so long, but it's against those who've conducted the coup.
Indeed, one thing to remember, of course, and you've pointed this out to me and us here at France 24 many times, that there are so many different ethnic groupings within Myanmar, and often there's conflict between those groupings as well, and big issues bubbling under. And like you say, the military maybe appears to be for now at least, uniting those groups in what
traditionally they've played divide and rule. The Burma majority, which is what the British did, against the ethnic minorities, who make up about a third of the population. But this time they've actually not playing divide and rule. They've attempted to play divide and rule, but it's in fact failed, and the repression has led to this kind of unity that we're seeing in the opposition.
Indeed, that 40% figure you spoke of earlier, I think equates to probably the same amount of votes percentage-wise, 14%, that they got in the election in November when Aung San Suu Kyi won by a landslide.
Aung San Suu Kyi, her party, because of the first-past-the-post system, her party got about 2/3 of the vote, but they got 82% of the seats. And what the military have in mind, again learning from the Thai case, is to change the electoral system, perhaps bring in proportional representation. They would only need then to get 25% of the seats, add that to the 25 they've already got, and they've got the majority. So that could be their end game, to try and give a kind of democratic fig leaf to what they've done.
Indeed, that kind of political manoeuvring, gerrymandering, call it what you like, all sounds quaint until you look on the streets and there are people dead. And this is the reality in Myanmar today, isn't it? Let's bring in, thank you, David, for now. Let's bring in Michael Charney, who's Professor of Asian and Military History at the School of Asian Studies. Michael, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time. The issue that we're obviously discussing here is everything that's happening in Myanmar right now. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the tactics that the military junta is using.
Well, I haven't heard anything that I disagree with so far in terms of the other commenters' comments. The military's tactics, what has happened in the past number of years, maybe 5 or 6 years, and a little bit longer for Australia, is that foreign governments have played a role in training the Damodar, dealing with Damodar officers, and attempting to teach a methodology about how crowd control, controlling the internet, and these kinds of things, dealing with cybercrime, things they're using right now. And I would say that probably, although it's hard to say that in the context of them having just killed 20-something people yesterday, that they tried for a little while. There was an increased awareness, as opposed to what has happened in the past, that they were being watched, and that there was some kind of a more restraint that had to be shown in front of the cameras. And of course, that's off now. That they're past that. Because I think what people forgot was it's one thing for Australia to teach the military. It's one thing to have the military, the police use restraint in the context of a democracy. It's another thing to try to impart these lessons on a country like Myanmar to the military, which is regularly abuses minorities. So I don't think that these lessons got very far. And I think we've seen they lasted for about 2 weeks, and now 2.5 weeks, and now it's over. The other thing I'd like to comment on is in terms of the overall context here, is my own view is that there's 2 points at which this is not going to be that this could have been resolved and pulled back. And one of them was in the days immediately after the military takeover, the coup. I think that was probably as close as we could have been to a point where we could roll things back. I don't think that's possible now. And if the Burmese really do want to change things, they're going to have to go all the way with this. There won't be a chance otherwise. If we could look at the military's tactics diplomatically, one thing they've done by engaging all the violence in this very brutal way is they've now changed the international conversation. It's no longer about reinstall Aung San Suu Kyi. Now all the discussion is about observe peace, observe, stop the violence, this kind of thing. For everything from the UN to ASEAN, that's all about let's stop the violence in Myanmar. It's we push things one step further, and if the international community doesn't go back to we need to restore the government, the military is just going to maintain control.
Jarwin, criticising the international community in our very first comment. Michael, I'm staying with you for another question. You say, obviously, it's kind of the military's succeeded in recalibrating what the international community or international voices are saying in terms of let's bring peace, not reinstate Aung San Suu Kyi. But the people on the streets, they're calling for her to come back, aren't they? The people on the streets are calling for civilian rule to be reinstated. The military firing live bullets at them.
Well, they're calling for a restoration of democratic space, and Aung San Suu Kyi is the one who, and the NLD are the ones who were last elected, so they're all on board for that. But it's not necessarily only about restoring Aung San Suu Kyi as a person. The other thing about the international community is there are different types of angles we can take on this, and one of them I've taken is, okay, yes, we know the military is bad and the people are right in this, but giving false hope for the international community, unless they're willing to do something, isn't actually a great thing to do. And if you think about it, what is the international community going to do when we look at around the different countries around Burma? Anybody who could get involved, nobody's going to get involved in a meaningful way for one reason or another. So I think the conversation has to be about how do we get the ethnic groups involved in this, the ethnic areas. How do we mobilize people within Burma as much as they can? Because the international community, they'll have sanctions and this kind of thing, but for a lot of reasons, the military is going to be able to get around much of this, and I don't think anybody's going to try to do anything meaningful.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. I'm out of time for this part, but I'm going to squeeze in a quick comment from Jia Win from the Burma Human Rights Network, who's joining us. We'll go to him right now. Jia Win, in terms of getting the ethnic groups involved, kind of a brief reaction to that before we go to the end of part one from you?
Yeah, the ethnic group is now, thanks to very poor policy of the Aung San Suu Kyi last 5 years, they feel they are betrayed. So now, like Rakhine State, there isn't happening anything, But a few days ago, the group of young students in Tandoes Township, they stand up against the military and they've been arrested, and their families still don't know where they've been taken. So this is in Rakhine State, there isn't happening much. And there are many cities and towns and ethnic areas, but like Kachin State, like Karen State, they are heavily involved. The public is, overwhelmingly involved in this uprising. It is that the public-wise, they are not much, divided. But in the top level, there are some people, some leading people in the leading roles. They feel that they don't trust Aung San Suu Kyi. But their mistake is, this uprising is not for Aung San Suu Kyi release. This is for democratic reforms. This is a much, much bigger aims and goals and aspiration of the people here. So this is we cannot portray this is just because of the Aung San Suu Kyi, release or just because of the, NLD party. This is for the whole Burma. Every living people in Burma should involve, and it is involving, and this is our future. For
Jobin,
the future of the generation that's coming.
I have to stop you there. I'll bring you back first in part two, sir. Sorry, we're out of time. That's part one of the debate. Do stay with us. More to come. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. Myanmar under the military coup, at least 18 killed on the bloodiest day yet. A day later, the people are still protesting. Let's show you the most recent images coming out of Yangon, the main city. The people still resisting, in spite of the fact the army is willing to fire live bullets at them. So the scene in the biggest city of Myanmar, Yangon. Meanwhile, Aung San Suu Kyi, the de facto president, arrested by the military on February the 1st, for alleged rigging of the election in November that she won by a landslide, has appeared in court again via video link. She still hasn't been seen publicly since her arrest. Well, our guests for this discussion are the Myanmar specialist here in the studio, David Kamru from Sciences Po. David, great to see you, sir. Jia Win is founder and executive director of the Burma Human Rights Network. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Michael Charney joining us by phone, professor and Asian and military history at the School of Asian Studies. And that man is Matthew Smith, co-founder and chief executive of Fortify Rights. So, an unlikely condemnation of the coup came from Myanmar's ambassador to the United Nations. Let's listen to his words.
We need further strongest possible action from the international community to immediately end the military coup, to stop oppressing the innocent people, to return the state power to the people, and to restore the democracy.
We understand he's been sacked by the leaders in Myanmar. As I promised, let's go back to Jia Win, founder and executive director of the Burma Human Rights Network, to continue what he was saying at the end of part one. We were talking about the ethnic issue and possibly uniting and seeing where that could go in terms of keeping pressure up. What do you think? Is that possible, sir?
It is absolutely possible. The important point right now is there is a government, NLD members, they have formed CRPH. It's going to substitute a government. So these government need to immediately, react immediately and reach out to the ethnic minorities. And this is what international community need to reach them out and push them forward to join force with other minorities and ethnic political parties, and to form a government. And the second, and before going to do this, international community need to put one condition. In order to recognize any government in Burma right now, that government must be promised that they are going to sign Rome Statute. And this is the very important change. Once Burma is signed Rome Statute, this will guarantee for the safety and security of the minorities. And exactly this is what ethnic minorities will be happy with it.
And that includes, of course, Jiawin, just to keep you with us, the kind of the ultimate minorities in Myanmar, the Rohingya Muslims, who, of course, have been victim of, according to the UN, a kind of state-sponsored genocide in Rakhine State, forced over the border. It's the misery that comes from their story on a daily basis is rather overwhelming. How can there be in Myanmar an administration that at the one level is persecuting its own people and then acting in such horrific ways to the Rohingya Muslims? How can this be tolerated? Do you think they, for instance, the biggest ally of Myanmar, China, should have spoken out? China should have said something about this?
I mean, if you look at the Aung San Suu Kyi policy in past 5 years, she's not only silent about the Rohingya people, she also silent about the Rakhine people. She even called Rakhine Arms Group as a terrorist organization. She also silent about the Kachin in the north. So she has been failed for all the minorities. But for the Rohingya community, she is a complicit on the genocide. This is something she has crossed a red line, which is unacceptable to the international community as well as for the minorities in Burma. And also, there are majority of those people who we are very encouraged to learn that the people who are exactly leading this today uprising, the young generation, they are very much supportive to the Rohingya cause, and they are standing up on the human rights values. This is the thing which encouraged me a lot to stand up and to work as much as I can, because this is the hope for the future of for Burma. But as for the China, what we see is China is playing double standard games in Burma. They are supporting the military. They are collaborating with the NLD party. They are also supporting arms group. But what they cannot do is they cannot convince the people of Burma to agree on their poor policy, because people of Burma are aware that China is committing genocide against the Uyghur people. China is committing heinous human rights violations, as well as they are exploiting environmental things. What's going on in Burma hugely impact from Chinese investment.
Indeed. Perhaps we're not surprised that China not choosing to speak up, given, as you've just pointed out, Jiawin, its performance against its own people within its own borders. Let's bring Matthew Smith back in for more comment from Fortify Rights. Matthew, Aung San Suu Kyi, her reputation stained forever now, it seems, with the way that she's behaved in terms of how the Rohingya have been treated and not speaking out about that, and a number of issues. China, of course, not lifting a finger to try to stop what's going on. We heard from Jiawin earlier on that the international community as a whole, and he included France in that, not really speaking up and doing enough. Is that what needs to happen? France needs to say something. Britain needs to say something. The US needs to do something.
Absolutely. I think governments around the world need to speak with a singular voice to not only condemn the coup and condemn the crackdown, but refuse to legitimize the Myanmar military junta. And on that point, it's not entirely clear to us yet that the military junta has the authority to fire Myanmar Ambassador John Motun. And so that remains to be seen. But I do think there is space for sanctions that have not yet been tried. And I think it's important to remember as well that the civil disobedience movement in Myanmar right now is essentially attempting rather successfully to bring the military junta to a grinding halt in terms of the functions of the state. And building on that, there are sanctions that the international community can consider to support the people of Myanmar in that effort, including blocking the natural gas revenues. Total, Chevron, other multinational corporations are operational in Myanmar, extracting natural gas. And if those revenues were blocked, the junta would absolutely be extremely concerned about that.
It is the politics of energy, Matthew, that could be the key thing. Matthew, can I just put this to you? Very often when sanctions are taken out, it's the people who suffer. Is that the risk?
Well, certainly with broad-based sanctions, and we certainly, Fortify Rights is not recommending those types of sanctions. I think any sanctions need to be targeted. And also it should be noted that, sanctions have limited utility. This would not be a silver bullet, but I think the idea right now would be to apply strategic, laser-like focus on the military junta, and certainly blocking the natural gas revenues would go a long way to do that. Those natural gas revenues are used by the state of Myanmar. The military junta is not the state of Myanmar, and so it would be appropriate to prevent the junta from misappropriating those funds.
Indeed. Matthew, thank you very much indeed. Do stay with us. We have a symbolic empty chair in the studio because we did approach via the embassy, the Myanmar establishment, the new establishment, the military junta, for some kind of comment or an interviewee to come in and join this debate. Clearly, we got absolutely nowhere, no response, no reply. So empty chair for them. On the other side of our studio, David Cameron from Sciences Po, a specialist on Southeast Asia, and we often have your opinions on Myanmar. We appreciate it. You had something to add, sir?
No, I think Matthew hit on the key word, legitimacy. And there is something that the international community could do. A number of members of parliament from the NLD have set up, or they're in the process of setting up, a government in exile. 15 of them. It's called the Commission to Represent the Parliament. And giving legitimacy to them once they're set up, and there are people from the ethnic minorities who will be part of that government in exile. This is where we could deny legitimacy to that government. And that's something that perhaps we could get ASEAN on board, because ASEAN, for me, is the key player, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Indonesia's making some initiatives about a meeting. It's tried to play a negotiator. There was a meeting in Bangkok with a representative of the junta. But they also spoke to somebody from the opposition. But there, the expelling Myanmar from ASEAN would be a big deal, because Myanmar's membership, encouraged under the military in the late 1990s by the Prime Minister at the time, a General Kim Yunt, was very important. It was part of giving this democratic facade. Myanmar's coming back onto the world scene. Now, to take that away from them, to show that also to ASEAN that there is reputational damage to have such a black sheep in the family, I think it is an important thing. And this is something that I've argued in Brussels that the European Union could be doing, given its interparliamentary relationship between the ASEAN Parliamentary Association and the European Parliament. So, certainly the West is in a kind of supportive role. Change will come from the people of Myanmar itself. We must show enormous solidarity. But there are a number of symbolic things, and more than symbolic, this effectively freezing the assets from oil and gas. The Biden administration has frozen $1 billion of assets in the United States. So these things, make them suffer. I mean, the civil disobedience movement, there was a strike yesterday or a few days ago of architects and engineers. We've had 15,000 people in I think, major ministries who've resigned. So you're actually, grinding the country to a stop. So you'll be governing an empty shell, and that may get the message across to the military.
Indeed. February the 1st is when the coup happened. Aung San Suu Kyi charged again today. We've had people killed over the weekend, of course, on Sunday, at least 18 people shot dead by the military. And one wonders whether that is going to be the end of the deaths on the street. David Cameron from Sciences Po, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring back in Michael Charney. Professor of Asian and Military History at the School of Asian Studies. Thank you, sir, for joining us, Michael Charney. We appreciate your time. I'm just thinking about this issue about sort of ASEAN maybe not acting. I'm thinking about sort of the international community perhaps not speaking up strongly enough, not acting strongly enough. What needs to be done, do you think?
Well, I don't think anybody's really will speak up strongly enough or in a unified enough voice to have a dent. One of the important things we have to remember is who's actually in charge of the military. And Min Aung Hlaing isn't, not to cast insults, just to go on what we know. He's not the brightest of the bunch, and he's not as savvy when it comes to international diplomacy and these kinds of things. It's unfortunate that we don't have a brighter general on board who sees the damage that this is going to cause. What is it going to take? I think it really would have to take significant pressure from the PRC and from ASEAN. Otherwise, basically it doesn't matter what the rest of the world does. So long as Russia and the PRC and ASEAN can compensate for any damage that's done by alienating the rest of the world. So if you're going to have any kind of leverage on Burma, it has to be something, forget about everything else, it has to be something that's going to get the PRC and ASEAN to actually do something, really put on real pressure, really cut off the regime, really. Min Aung Hlaing has a personal relationship with the head of the government in Thailand. Just having him try to exert leverage as well. He said he's not going to, but just find some way. So I think you might have to think about maybe pressure on the Chinese economy, maybe sanctions on China for how things are going astray on the One Belt, One Road and its policies in Myanmar and other countries along the BRI. Look what it's doing to Laos. So I think that you're really going to have to find a way to put pressure on ASEAN and China, or you're not going to have any change.
What you're saying, Michael, is essentially it doesn't matter what the EU decides to do or what the EU doesn't decide to do. It isn't going to make any difference.
Look at the size of their investment in the economy. One of the problems of having so many sanctions, not that I disagree with them, but having sanctions that so many times over the years that Western democracies have gotten on board for, means that you don't have that leverage over the economy anymore. You don't have that kind of influence. Who has that influence and leverage? China and ASEAN, and to a certain extent, Russia. That's where you need to apply the pressure.
Michael, thank you for the moment. Let's bring in Jiao Win once again, founder and executive director of the Burma Human Rights Network. We were talking earlier, Jiao Win, about China. Michael there, once again, saying the People's Republic of China, then adding Russia and adding ASEAN, as David Cameron was saying, need to really come together as in some way to sort of change things or affect some kind of a change. Do you feel, Jiao Win, that it's something that could be possible? Do you feel any kind of optimism hearing these words?
As you see, UN Security Council is clear evidence here. Every time, and US and UK is a pen holder on Burma, any time they try to use that platform, it ended up with doing nothing. So the China and Russia is very good at to blocking everything not to happen anything from on Burma. So we should have need to think that without going that platform, is there any other option to directly involve to Burma and to support the people who are on the ground, protect them, to protect the people who let them continue the protest. In order to continue this protest, they need protection. So what is the international community going to offer them? And on the other hand, of course, there is a large scale when you talk about involving China in this sanction. Of course, that is a large scale. But one thing very important to note is sanction always work. If you look at the 2007, when there was an uprising, when international community put some sanction, there was a regime change. That's why regime changed. In 2008, they approved immediately constitution, and 2010, there was a regime change. So sanction, I don't agree that sanction doesn't work. Sanction definitely work, but it depends what kind of sanction we are going to impose. If we are going to hit their pocket, that will be effective. That will be going to work.
Jiao Win, hear what you're saying. David Cameron is dying to get in here, but I need to put to Jiao Win something that's come into the studio here from Washington. Jiao Win, this is from the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, saying that the killings in Myanmar represent an escalation of the ongoing crackdown on pro-democracy protesters. We, the United States, is preparing additional actions to impose further costs on those responsible for this latest outbreak of violence and the recent coup, and they expect, they say, to have more on this in coming days. A quick reaction from you, sir, to that news from the White House press secretary.
Thank you. We are very encouraged, and we also want to see the same with the European Union. This is the important that the free world need to lead, and we need to prove our principle is alive. And we are actually invaded by the fascism in democratic system in Burma, has been invaded by the fascism. This is the military exactly that trained by the fascists, and they are try to overthrow a democratically elected government. So there must be a strongest response from democratically elected government and the free world.
Jawin,
thank you very much indeed. David Cameron in the studio.
I agree with Jawin that sanctions have had some effect, but they have an effect when they're part of a three-pronged strategy. One play we never talk about is Japan. Japan is a major investor in Myanmar. The Tilawa Special Economic Zone is the one which is the most productive of all the economic zones set up. And they have always played this kind of intermediary role between the good cop of ASEAN and the bad cop of the West, of the West, so to speak. And so we need to get the Japanese. I mean, Japanese companies, Kirin is stopping their relationship with a military-owned conglomerate. I think it's Toyota or Mitsubishi who are postponing putting in their factory. These things, these economic costs, I think need to be made clear to the military. If they're accompanied also by these political actions, like recognition of this potential government in exile.
Indeed. Just to remind people, we did ask the Myanmar military to comment or take part in this debate. They didn't get back to us, refused to comment. 18 people dead after their latest firing on the protesters. One can imagine they perhaps feel their situation is in some way indefensible. Let's bring in Matthew Smith, co-founder and chief executive of Fortify Rights. Matthew, with your insight into what's going on in Myanmar right now, and with your own insight, given what you do and how you campaign so strongly, do you feel the words from the White House are words that will, in some point, weigh heavily in Myanmar?
Well, the extent to which it will change the thinking of the military elite, I think, remains to be seen. But these efforts are absolutely crucial right now. Again, not a silver bullet, but these types of sanctions, targeted sanctions that are focusing on not only the individuals responsible for these violations and for this coup, but also sanctions that would effectively block revenue that the military junta would very clearly misappropriate. So I think it's important. It's important from a messaging perspective, so that it's clear to the not only the people of Myanmar but also the military generals that this is completely and utterly unacceptable. So we do hope there will be more effort, particularly from not only the U.S. government but as the other panelists here have mentioned, from ASEAN states. When left to their own devices, ASEAN states will not do anything to respond to this. And so I think it's imperative that governments, including France, including the US and others, do the diplomatic work to incentivize ASEAN states to do the right thing in this situation.
Matthew Smith, thank you very much indeed. We're out of time, but I'm giving the last word to Jawin from the Burma Human Rights Network. In many ways, sir, this is your debate. Tell us what your message is, what you would like to say if you could be face-to-face now with someone from Myanmar's military.
I think what I want to tell them is that their days are very limited now. They need to change, but it is too late for them because they are not going to survive in the fight for the justice and for the justice for the people who've been living under their oppression and brutal regime since several decades, where my parents, where all my siblings, all my relative, all my people, we have gone through such a hardship in our life. We will never forget that, and this is the generation we are not going to allow to continue to the coming generation. This is the struggle. We are inspired by all international community and also inspired by the around the world people who are oppressed, and they're liberated. And so we are also determined to achieve our liberty. So I think this is the time is very limited for them to come to the point that they understand that the world is watching them and it is going to happen. The change is going to happen in Burma. That is very sure.
Jarwin of the Burma Human Rights Network, thank you so very much for joining us. Thanks to Michael Charney from the School of Asian Studies. Thanks to Matthew Smith of Fortify Rights. And thanks to David Cameron from CSPO joining us here in the studio. Always a pleasure to see you, sir. Thank you all for your contribution. And thanks to you at home for watching, or wherever you're watching us here in France 24. We will, I can assure you, keep across all developments for you on the situation in Myanmar. This is the France 24 debate. Stay with us.